All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another one of our Thursday night book reviews. I'm indie author Nick Belisi. If this is your first time joining us, I usually take Thursdays to go through my books. More recently, with this book that we're reading now, I've been reading the chapters and been giving the Easter eggs after the chapter's done. Initially, with the first book, I was just giving the Easter eggs and kind of blowing through it a little bit, but this book is a lot more detail and stuff like that. And as a special thank you to the people that are following me and stuff like that, I am reading each chapter each week. So there's 20 chapters in the book that we're reading. This night, we are going to be doing chapter 3. The book that we are talking about, of course, is my second book, Paradise Reborn. It is a direct continuation from the very first book I wrote, and we're just going to dive right into it. So let's get into that. Now, to give us a little bit of background, where we left off last week, we did chapter 2, and in chapter 2, the story follows my main character, Gwen, and she had just gotten on the bus to head to Reidsville after receiving a strange phone call, basically insinuating that she should come home. So that's where we left off. So chapter 3, Home is Where the Heart Is. I'm going to get right to it. Sitting on the bus and staring out the window conjured up many questions in my mind. I couldn't believe after all these years I was going back to Reidsville. I left that whole life behind me, but I could feel something gravitating me back to it. The strange call and all the other subtle hints forcing me to confront my past. I had no idea where I would even start when I got back there. The only thing I knew I needed to do was to head straight to the liquor store. I missed my opportunity before getting on the bus, and I knew the supply I had would only last me the bus ride. The Drunken Monk was the local liquor store in Reidsville, and by the time I would arrive, it would certainly be open. Once I got some more booze, then I could try to find a place to stay for the night. I had no one left in mind I could ask, but I did have a little money left over from Ryan, so that would help. I thought to myself I could easily panhandle it as no one would recognize me, and I could probably make some decent money doing it. It had been so many years that I'm sure most kids my age would have gone on with life and went away to college. The thought of that made me jealous because that should have been me. I should have been worrying about studying for exams rather than a place to sleep. I would have never imagined in my life would come to things that I experienced. All the pain and struggles I have faced in my life in the last 7 years, most people will never have to go through. Life could have been so very different for me. When I was younger, before my parents died, I always dreamed of becoming a famous musician. I had a very deep soul and enjoyed writing a lot. Music was something that no matter who you are or what you were feeling could give you some sort of an escape. To be able to listen to a song and feel what an artist is going through made me fall in love with it. You could pour your heart out in a song and have so many people feeling your emotions and letting them know that you aren't alone. When I lived with Stacy, I would keep a journal and I would always write down lyrics from my favorite songs and random thoughts. I would find myself with a song always on my mind, humming it to myself as a form of comfort. I don't know what happened to that journal, and I haven't written in such a long time. Over the years, I lost interest in almost everything except my daily survival. I didn't have the normal luxuries everyone else had, and I didn't keep up with anything current. I couldn't tell you what was happening in the world or sometimes even what day it was. My life had simply become used to the changing of the seasons and the placement of the sun in order to track for what I needed to get done and keep going. The most basic things like food, shelter, and warmth were all I cared about, along with finding a way to get drunk each and every day, which gave me a purpose in life. I reached down into my backpack and took a long drink from the whiskey bottle. The taste was so disgusting, and I chased it down with an orange soda I had stolen earlier. Strangely enough, the soda masked the taste well. After a few moments, I could feel that all too familiar feeling of the buzz coming on. My cheeks began to feel warm, and an overwhelming sense of comfort washed over me. I leaned back into my seat and closed my eyes, soaking in all the alcoholic bliss. After a few minutes with my eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the world around me, I drifted off to sleep. I could feel someone placing their hand on me and touching me, so I shot up from my seat in a defensive mode, but no one was there. I could have sworn someone was touching me, but everyone was standing up and walking off the bus. I looked out my window as I wiped my eyes and noticed the bus was parked right across the street from the Reidsville General Store. The overwhelming feeling of deja vu came rushing over me. This was the last thing I saw when I left here, and now it's the first sight upon my return. I gathered my things and started to walk off the bus. The crisp smell of fall and fireplaces burning filled the air, which subconsciously conjured up so many memories from my previous life. Strangely enough, it made me think of my mom and one memory of her. My mom used to always talk about how certain smells in the air would conjure up memories from the past. She would explain to me when I was younger how certain things in life would be the benchmark of my whole existence, and even years after they occurred, a certain smell or taste could make me remember them. She told me that my mind was like a library, and although so many things were stored in there, my brain would attach to things like smell or taste to quickly locate different things within my mind. She had told me that by knowing the things that trigger these memories, that I could make my mind stronger and store information within it better than the average person. I had no idea what she was talking about until today. The tidal waves of memories crashing within my mind was so overwhelming. It almost felt like I'd stepped right back to where I'd left off. The feelings swirling inside me were becoming too much, and I needed to get a drink in me. I started to walk down the road a little ways and head for the Drunken Monk. The store wasn't very far from the bus stop, which was convenient for me. I always loved that about small towns, and this was very appealing to Reedsville. All the houses were just outside of downtown, but the shops and things to do were all located in one small area. It was nice in the way that you didn't really have to worry about anyone bothering you when you were in the homes, and the only sort of traffic you encountered was people going to and from work. As I approached the store, I walked inside and headed straight over to where I knew the vodka was. I had been here so many times before with Stacy's mom, because she often drank wine and would drive us here when she needed to stock up. There used to be a man that worked the register that would always give out lollipops when Stacy's parents would bring their kids in. I didn't see anyone at the counter when I walked in, and that was so many years ago that I doubt he still worked here. As I headed down the aisle, I just needed to grab something cheap enough to work. I found a jug handle of some vodka written in Russian that was on sale for $11, and I knew I had found my match. This jug handle could at least get 2 or 3 days worth of solid drinking for me. As I walked up to the counter and placed the bottle down, I patiently waited for the clerk to come to the register. I waited for about 2 minutes but didn't see anyone at all. I started to look around the store when I noticed a younger guy standing in the doorway of the back door to the store. He had a cigarette in his hand and he seemed to be arguing on the phone with someone. These were the golden opportunities I would look for because I knew I wasn't going to be paying for anything today. I slowly began to walk around to the register, keeping my eyes on the store clerk in case he turned around. As I approached the back of the counter, I opened my backpack and started dumping a few things in. I grabbed a few packs of cigarettes and about 4 flask-sized bottles of vodka and shoved them in the bag. I didn't want to risk being here too long, so I quietly ran back around to the front and grabbed my jug of vodka. The clerk was still not paying any attention to me, so I cockily waved in his direction and thanked him for the free stuff under my breath. Feeling accomplished in my task, I started walking out of the store and back into downtown Reedsville. I needed a place that I could sit and drink a little bit and get my bearings, and I began to wonder where I would go. It was only midday, and everyone would be at work or school, which gave me an idea. When some of the older kids would get together, they would hang out behind Pomodoro's Pizza, and there were some chairs set up. Everyone in town when I grew up would always hope to be invited to hang out there because it meant you were cool. I was still young when I left here, but now I could live out my childhood fantasy. I started heading towards the pizzeria, which was only about 2 minutes of walking from here. As I came around the corner of the shop, I walked towards the back hoping no one would be there, and of course it was empty. It looked like no one had been there for a while. There was garbage all over the place, and it just seemed abandoned. As I approached some of the junkyard car seats, I saw an official notice from what looked to be the police. I picked up the notice, and it said no one was allowed to be hanging out here anymore, and if anyone is caught trespassing, they would be fined or possible imprisonment. I guess the police here finally cracked down on all the underage activities that took place at this spot. Since I didn't want to be fined or imprisoned, I started to think of an alternate place to go. It had been so long since I was here, and I didn't really have many places in mind. I started to think about where I would go in Stinson, and it made me remember the lake that was located here. The lake was called Lake Lucky, and since that's where a lot of kids would go to hook up or swim. There was a little bit of a walk, but I had nothing else going on. I started to head there and began thinking about the summers I spent there with Stacy. Parents would let their kids go there in the summer because it was on the residential side of town and it was easy enough to access should they want to check in on us. I can remember holding on as tight as I could while Stacy pushed me on the rope swing that was above the lake. Us kids would swing out as far as we could and jump off into the water. For a young kid at the lake, you would wish summer would never end. There were a few kids in my grade that lived on the lake itself, and those summer nights spent out on the pontoon boat listening to music and night swimming were some of the happiest moments I have from my life. Once my parents died, I started to withdraw from everyone, so those fun nights began to slowly recede into cherished memories. As I kept walking, I felt like I was in a movie because everything from my childhood began resurfacing in my mind and playing out like a film reel. I could see memories from my childhood so vividly I could almost, like a flashback, see myself in different parts of the town doing things. It was so bizarre because it had been so very long since I accessed this part of my brain. Reedsville hardly ever crossed my mind since I left other than my family. Although I had a feeling of joy in me, I also had a deep sadness. I still didn't have my parents, and this place more than anywhere else conjured up a lot of feelings on that subject. I really wish my parents hadn't died that night, and I wish a better understanding of what exactly happened. I never investigated it when I got older because I was preoccupied with my own life. I thought to myself, why would I want to revisit that and make my life even harder? I do want to see my old home and visit the place where they were buried, since it had been so long since I paid any tribute to them. I figured maybe I could pick some flowers while I was at the lake and leave them for my parents. I never actually went to their graves other than the funeral. I spent time talking aloud before as I would lay down at night, hoping that wherever they were, they could hear me. I don't know how I feel about the afterlife, or if there's anything after this, but if there is, I hope I do see them again. My parents didn't practice religion in my house much, although I do know my mom was religious. She would do a lot of volunteer work in her spare time with a group of women. I forgot what they called themselves, but I do know it had the word angels in it. Towards the end of her life, she was devoting a lot of her time with the group, and I know it made my dad very upset. I can remember he would come home and see me sitting in front of the TV watching my shows and then not seeing dinner on the table. He would constantly be arguing with my mom over it and the overall upkeep of the house. I would try my best to drown it out most times because it happened frequently. My dad's name was Lewis, and he owned the big auto shop in the town called Lou's Auto Body. Most of the people in town would use my father's shop, and he was very well known in the community. My mother's name was Rita, and she was a pharmacist who had her own drugstore in town called The Perfect Dose. My mom always talked about how badly she wanted to help people ever since she was a young girl, and found her calling in the field of medicine. My parents both made very good money, and I lived a very comfortable life growing up. I had nice clothes, and my house was very beautiful. My parents had all the luxuries in the world, and a lot of my friends at school were jealous of my family's wealth. Ironically enough, I never saw any of that money when they died. I do remember my mom's pharmacy being bought out once they did die, and it was converted into a movie rental place. My dad's shop was taken over by his best friend, Gerald Steinwald. I always referred to him as Uncle Jerry since I was a little kid. My father and him had grown up together since they were very young, and when my dad opened his shop, he partnered up with Jerry. I do remember at my parents' funeral, Jerry told me that he would keep the shop the same in honor of my father and would always look out for me. I never saw Jerry again after that day, but I didn't go looking for him either. I thought about maybe stopping in to see him and then check out the shop, but I didn't want people to see me the way I was now. I didn't want to feel that overwhelming shame of people looking down on me when just a few years ago I was proud of who I was. It would only fuel my depression and alcohol intake even more, and there was no point in revisiting that. I didn't know why I was here, but whenever I had doubt about something in life, I would always tell myself to let the liquor do the thinking. Now that I'm finally approaching the lake, I would relax a little bit and just see where the alcohol would take me. The entrance of the lake looked the same as it did from the last time I was here. It's as if time stood still and waited for me to return. It gave me such a feeling of nostalgia seeing this again. I started up the trail leading to the lake and headed towards the rope swing. When I got to the top of the hill, I noticed police tape scattered all over the place. It didn't look like it was freshly placed here, but more so that it was forgotten about some time ago. I wondered what had happened here. I thought maybe one of the kids that would come up here in the summertime must have gotten hurt, and they probably put the tape up to stop them from coming here. As I investigated the area further, I saw what looked like a little memorial set up near the big tree where the swing once dangled from. It was a pearly white cross with the name Patrick engraved across it. I couldn't remember anyone named Patrick, so this must have been someone younger than me. The date on the cross said that he had died about 2 years ago and was only 18 when he passed. That would have put him either in my graduating class or the year below me. I couldn't think of anyone off the top of my head because in the last years I was here, I wasn't talking to that many people. I took my backpack off my shoulders and grabbed out a soda. I opened the jug of vodka I was carrying and took a massive gulp from it. I quickly took the soda and chased it down. I then took the bottle of vodka and raised it into the air a little as if I were to give a toast and cheered to Patrick, whoever he was. Drinking long from the bottle and chasing it down again, I started to feel a little warm inside. I walked over to the ledge where the swing would cast us into the water and took a seat. The view of the lake in front of me was so beautiful. I always enjoyed nature and being outdoors, and most people would have to pay for a view like this. It reminded me of so many paintings I would see on the walls of motels that I would frequent. These types of views must have been the inspiration for their artwork. I felt as if this is exactly where I wanted to be right now. The soft sounds of the birds chirping in the background as the crisp air rolled off the water and gently touched my face made me feel so at ease. I kept taking swigs from my bottle and taking in all the beauty that surrounded me. I would rate my level of intoxication on a scale of 1 to 10, and I wanted to be at least sitting on a solid 4 before I made my next move. I knew drinking at the rate I was going to, it wouldn't take that long to get there. For someone who was conditioned to drink and only weighed about 100 pounds, it didn't take me very long to achieve the desired feeling. I was what a man would call a cheap date. A cheap bottle of vodka and something to chase it all down was more than adequate to satisfy me. I took a few more gulps and then waited for my body to process it. After about 15 minutes of taking in the amazing scenery, I knew I had hit the level I wanted to. The anxiety and the lingering panic had completely subsided. I reached into my backpack beside me and pulled out one of the packs of cigarettes I stole. I wasn't really a smoker, as it was an expensive habit, especially in New York, but I wouldn't turn it away if someone offered it to me. I kept a lighter in my backpack just in case I ever needed it, so I reached into the front part and pulled it out. I began to slam the cigarettes on my wrist in order to pack them down. I never knew why people did that until someone had to explain it to me. Essentially, you're packing the tobacco down in the cigarettes to give them a smoother burn while you smoke them. I guess I didn't smoke enough to really know the difference, but I took his word for it. I began to remove the plastic around the pack and threw it on the ground. The outside plastic Victor used to refer to as cellophane, as we would use it to put heroin in if we were short on supplies. You would slide it off the bottom of the pack of cigarettes, place the drugs in it, and then use a lighter to seal the top. Victor always called it his last resort baggie. It's funny how something so simple can bring back such an insignificant memory. That seemed to completely change my whole demeanor. I didn't want to start having myself turn into an emotional drunk, spiraling into an assortment of depressing memories, so I did my best to readjust my thinking. I placed a cigarette into my mouth and lit it. The very first drag of the cigarette was the final straw to putting myself into a state of complete bliss. There was something so intoxicating about having a cigarette while being buzzed off alcohol. I would compare it to the cherry on top of a strawberry milkshake. They just went hand in hand, and I could see why people chain smoked when they were drinking. I wanted to stand up and walk around a little bit because in my history of drinking, if you stayed seated, once you stood up, you'd be on a whole other level of drunk. I made that mistake way too many times. And I didn't want to be completely hammered here at the lake and not be able to functionally make my way back to town. I got up off the ground and started to pace around the area a little bit. Stretching my legs and taking drags from the cigarette, I realized I may have overshot my drinking a little more than I initially anticipated. I could tell I was closer to a 6 on my scale, and I needed to relax on the drinking for a little bit. I reached down and placed the jug of vodka and soda back into my backpack. I began zipping up the bag when I heard some rustling coming from down towards the way I walked up. I stood up and tried to focus my vision on where I thought the sound was coming from. I noticed a man in the distance that seemed to be staring at me. I could barely make out his features, but I could tell the man had dark black hair. He was wearing a blue shirt that stood out among the environment he seemed to be trying to blend into. He started to slowly walk towards him, I started to slowly walk towards him a little so I could get a better view, and when he saw me coming, he took off towards the entrance. I tried to yell out at him, but he just kept on going. I grabbed my bag and started to follow him. I started my way down the hill and tossed the cigarette from my mouth onto the ground. He must have been going fast because even at the pace I was going, he was nowhere to be seen. When I reached the entrance to the lake, I felt a little lightheaded, so I sat down on the stump nearby. Panting a little bit, I focused my breathing and tried my best to calm down. After a few minutes and a few sips of vodka later, I started to calm down. After a few minutes, I wonder who could have been spying on me. It must have been, and worked my way around Reedsville from there. I figured after I stopped over there, I could head back downtown and find a place to stay for the night. My old home was about a 5-minute walk from here, so I began to casually head over there. My old home resided at 13 Pine Street, which was a side road off of the main drag which led into downtown called Red Oak Street. All the roads in the main part of the residential area were named after some type of forestry, which I thought was kind of unique. The road I was currently walking down from Lake Lucky was Spruce Run, and it led directly into Red Oak Drive, which would lead me to my old street. The town looked exactly how I remembered it, even being away from it so many years ago. The houses I would walk past routinely hadn't changed a whole lot other than small details. I had begun to wonder if any of the people I went to school with still resided here. I knew as I would be coming down Red Oak, a handful of kids I went to school with used to live there. As I came down the road a little bit, I noticed the house at 1423 Red Oak had a steel fence going around the entire property. The house seemed to be blocked off and there was some sort of vandalism done to the exterior of the house. I knew one of the girls that lived here. Her name was Cecile Morgan, and she was in the same grade as me when I attended school here. I think that she had an older sister that was a few grades above me as well. All the other houses in the area looked nothing like this one, and it made me wonder what had happened. As I walked up to the gate to take a better look, I could see some police tape scattered around the house. It looked like a crime had been committed here, and it made me think back to seeing the same type of tape at Lake Lucky. I thought to myself that maybe those things were connected, but I couldn't piece together how they would be. Cecile was always a nice girl in school, and we were lab partners in science class. I didn't know her well, but I do remember that she was always kind. I really hope nothing bad happened to her family. I reached down into my backpack and took a swig from the vodka bottle in honor of her. I swallowed the vodka hard with no chaser and put the bottle back into my bag. I took one more look at the house and kept heading down the street. I was only a few minutes away from my old home, and I was extremely nervous about seeing it again. What made me even more nervous was being near Stacy's house again, since she lived across the street from my old home. The overwhelming anxiety and overpowering alcohol in my body, I knew I should probably refuel before I arrived. On the corner of Red Oak and My Street, the bus stop that would take the residents into town was also the same stop us kids would get to school. There was a bench there, and I figured it would be the perfect spot to sit down and have a few drinks. As I approached the bench, I looked about to see if anyone was around and took a seat. Noticing no one was around, I dropped my bag at my feet and pulled the jug out. I quickly tipped the jug up and into my mouth, taking a few solid gulps as fast as I could. I then grabbed my soda and drank the rest of it down. I was going to give myself a few more minutes to let the alcohol do its job, so I decided to smoke another cigarette. Taking out the cigarette from my backpack, I had a sudden flashback pop into my brain of sitting here many years ago with Stacy, when life was much simpler. We would talk about life and our futures and all the drama going on in school. I deep inside missed her, and I always hated the way things ended between us. The thought popped into my head to maybe try and visit her while I was here, but I wasn't ready to open those wounds. Stacy had dreams of moving away from here and joining the military. I always thought she was crazy for doing so, and I pleaded with her many times to reconsider, but she was dead set on making it happen. Her grandfather served in the Navy, and she was so desperate to follow in his footsteps to become a medic. She always talked about seeing the world and helping people in need, and it's not to say that she wouldn't be good at it, but I was just worried for her safety. I didn't want my friend getting her legs blown off, fighting in some war she had no business being in. She could have easily become a doctor here or help people in need at home. I had admired her courage, but I didn't agree with what it was being used for. If she followed through with her plan, she'd be long gone now and probably stationed somewhere overseas. Although I missed her terribly, I did wish nothing but the best for her. As I finished up my cigarette, I threw it into the ground and began walking towards my old home. The anxiety mixing with the alcohol created a terrible storm inside me, which was not only fueled me to push onward, but also created a terrible realization about confronting my demons. It had just been so long since I had been here, and I didn't want to become overwhelmed. With each step I took drawing closer to my childhood home, I could feel all the pain I had left behind reemerging from deep within my soul. The claws of past trauma, tearing away at my emotions, sending nonstop impulses just to run away and not face it, became so overwhelming. I had to press on no matter what, because I needed answers for the reasons I was being drawn back here. It only took me a few minutes before I was standing in the street in front of my old home. As I gazed over at my home, there was nothing left of it. Builders must have come in and cleaned up the remains of it, and only fresh-cut grass was left behind. If I was unfamiliar with this property, you would think nothing ever happened here. The departure of my parents' souls from this very spot resembled nothing more than a peaceful monument that time moved on from. There was literally nothing left from the once so special place. I could feel my eyes tearing up remembering that night when I had lost them, and I realized I was standing in the same exact spot as that night. All the pain and loss I had buried inside me was completely back, as if not a moment had passed from that night. I was 14-year-old Gwen, staring into a fiery abyss once again. I couldn't contain it anymore as the tears rolled down my face and onto my clothing. I slid my bag off my shoulders and onto the ground in front of me. Desperately, I scrambled through the bag and tried to grab some more vodka. The pain was so overwhelming, and even though I had been drinking all day long, it still wasn't enough to tame my emotions. If anything, it felt like it was amplifying it. I had no healthy way of dealing with all this pain that was completely controlling my entire being other than a drink. I started chugging from the bottle without even a thought in my mind when suddenly I heard a snapping sound coming from behind me. It almost sounded like a photo was being taken of me. I turned around to see who was there, but I didn't see anyone. Maybe my mind was simply playing tricks on me again. I had been drinking all day, and auditory hallucinations were not uncommon for me. I brushed off the notion and started to walk towards my house where it once stood. As I stepped onto the lawn that once held my home, a familiar voice spoke out to me, and it's Stacy speaking at this point. They completely renovated the property a few years ago. I slowly turned around, tears pouring down my face with the bottle of vodka in hand, and saw Stacy standing in the street slightly in front of her house. She looked almost exactly the same as I last saw her, but older. Her hair was shorter, coming only slightly past her ears. She was wearing a black sweatshirt, blue jeans, and looked just as beautiful as she always did. My emotions and the vodka were getting the best of me as I dropped to my knees, crying as seeing her face was the final nail in the coffin for me emotionally. Stacy slowly began to walk over me and spoke. "It's been a long time, Gwen. I'm glad to see you're alive." I tried my best to stand up in order to run into her arms, but I couldn't muster up the strength. Stacy walked up to me, placed her arms over me, and helped me to my feet. She started slowly helping me over in the direction of her house, but I tried to pull away when Stacy said, "We need to get you inside and get you cleaned up. My mom isn't home and won't be for hours. Come on, let's get you inside and get you fixed up." Sobbing uncontrollably, I dropped the vodka into the ground near me and fell deep into a state of panic. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and my limbs were going numb. My entire being was being taken control of by an overwhelming presence, and I had no motor skills left in me. I became dead weight as I fell hard into the pavement, Stacy frantically doing her best to keep me awake as I succumbed to the darkness. I could feel my heart beating like a loud drum, sending vibrations up my neck and into my ears. My eyes sputtering open and closed, leaving me feeling I was knocking on death's door. I tried to whisper something out to Stacy, but before the words gained any momentum from my brain to my lips, I was completely unconscious. So, that was chapter 3 in the book, and now I can give you a little bit of Easter eggs. It's a big emotional chapter. I mean, Gwen is coming back to Reidsville. She's kind of giving us a little taste from where the first book left off, and I mean, you think about it, you know, you get that with Stella when you're reading the first book. You know, she talks about the time she spent hanging out behind Pomodoros, Lake Lucky, you know, when she goes up there and encounters Whiteface and Patrick hangs himself and all the stuff that goes on there. So to see it now, you know, 2 years later, you basically, you get the, I guess, the reemergence of Patrick, you know, when you see his cross, when Gwen goes there. You also get to see that Pomodoros, nobody's hanging out back there anymore. Like, the police kind of shut it down because of all the things that were going on. They don't want kids, like, loitering and stuff. So, you know, Reidsville's changed. Then especially when you get onto Stella Street, you know, basically what happens is that when they're on Stella Street, hang on one second. Yo. Basically when they get on that street, what happens is you get to see Stella's old house when she was growing up. And it's all like blocked off and stuff like that, and there's a fence around it, and it's been vandalized and stuff. So, you know, you're thinking at that point from the first book, like, you know, Thomas died, you know, Stella wound up in the psych ward, Cecile had already been dead for years, so it kind of gives you a glimpse of what happened as the, you know, basically time kept moving on. So you get to see a little different side of Reidsville now. And as we go deeper into the book, you're going to get more of a background of Reidsville and stuff like that. You're going to see, you know, some familiar faces and some new faces. You'll see basically where everybody left off from when that happened. Now, to jump into the Easter eggs a little bit. So, chapter 3, Home is Where the Heart Is. That's what we did tonight. Now, in it, we talk about how when Gwen gets off the bus for Reidsville, she goes to the Drunken Monk. Now, I got that name. There's actually a place down by where my father lives in South Carolina called the Drunken Monk. So, and it's a pretty neat establishment. They got a lot of cool stuff there. So I threw that in there as like homage to that. Gwen talks about when she used to go to the liquor store. Basically what was happening was when she was a kid, she would go there with like Stacy's mom and stuff like that. There would always be a man behind the counter that gave out lollipops and stuff. Now I threw that in there because the times when I would go to the liquor store or anything like that, you know, I usually shop local, so I don't go to like the big chain liquor stores or anything like that. So I'll go to like this place in town called Seplo's. I know the owner. He also owns another one that's directly behind the job I work at. So, I like to support local business if I'm picking anything up, and they always give out lollipops. So if there was ever a time like my daughter wanted me, or, I saw other people with their kids in there, they're always giving out lollipops. So that's where I threw that in. Now, the next thing that Gwen does when she's in the liquor store, she's talking about going to get the cheap vodka, with the Russian sounding name. So back when I was in my heydays of drinking and stuff like that, I used to drink probably like one of the cheapest vodkas. It was called Pop-Off. And you get like the jug handle of it. It'd be like $14 or something like that. And, that used to be like my thing because I was on a budget, and that was the thing that I went to. So that was another little nod to that. She talks about when she gets up to Lake Lucky, the summers spent at the lake were like the best times of her life, and there's a lot of memories that are held there and stuff. And one thing that she reminisces on about is about being on the pontoon boat and, wishing summer would never end. Well, when I was growing up, one of my childhood friends, his family owned a lake house, and every summer we would go there and stuff like that, and he had a pontoon boat, and he would take us out on the lake, and we would drink out there, we would go fishing, we would just jump off the boat and stuff like that. So many different nights that we would be out there, just out on the water, just having a blast, and it just felt like the summer was never going to end. So that's where the inspiration for that came into play. The next thing that I put in there is I was talking about when Gwen is up at the lake, and when she's up at the lake, she, goes to pack the cigarettes and stuff like that, and she talks about the cellophane. So if anybody that doesn't know, this is what cellophane is. And in my days and stuff like that, when I used to like smoke pot and stuff when I was a lot younger, if you didn't have any baggies or something like that and you met up with somebody, they would usually, there's a lot of smokers, they would take that off, put it in there, and then light the top and pin it shut. And it was just like an on-the-go kind of baggie. So anytime, like whenever I have a pack of cigarettes or anything like that, it always reminds me of that. So I threw that in there. And the last Easter egg that's actually in it is Stacy. So when she's talking about Stacy, she's talking about how Stacy's greatest dream was to join the Navy and be a corpsman, or, a medic, you would say. And I put that in there because I myself was in the Navy. So I didn't want to join the Navy for the same reasons that Stacy did, but I did put the Navy in there as an homage to something from my own life. Now, I made her a corpsman, or, again, a medic, because my cousin, who was also in the Navy, actually was a corpsman. And when we get into the next chapter and stuff like that, and you hear Stacy's story about what she was doing while in the military, that actually is a reimagined story of what my cousin did when he was in. So some of the details being the same, some of them changed a little bit, but yes, that inspiration stuff, like I said, I'll get to that Easter egg when we get into the next chapter, but you'll see that's where that came from. For going forward, on Tuesday, we are going to be doing self-destructive behaviors. We're going to be talking about, what they are, why people do them, the consequences of them. I'll give examples of things that I've done in my past and stuff like that, as far as that goes. And then, we're going to use some of the things that we talked about yesterday, like from DBT, to figure out ways to unwind these self-destructive behaviors, to basically relearn and reteach yourself healthy ways to deal with certain situations. Tips and tricks that I've learned myself to help with, my issues and stuff like that. And then also, what the experts say as well. So that's something cool to look forward to. I think it plays a big role, especially to anyone that has like BPD or people that are like super impulsive or have trauma in their life. They can find it helpful as far as hearing from somebody who's had a lifetime of dealing with stuff like that. You know what I mean? You could find other ways to be healthy about it, just to cope with it and whatnot. So that's what we're going to be doing Tuesday. I'm going to try again to do DBT on Wednesday. Again, it really just depends on scheduling. This time of the year is very, very tough with me with work, so it really just depends on that. But if I can, then Wednesday will definitely be another DBT night. And I'll have more information for you. I assumed it had been a little while since I've gone through the beginning part of that book. I didn't realize there's so much reading and not as much exercises. So I have to sit down and plan a little bit better to get more exercises involved and kind of just map it out a little bit better rather than last night where I was kind of free falling. And then next Thursday, we're going to come back and we're going to do chapter 4, which is called All Things Considered. We'll do another reading and stuff. Like I said, I plan on doing, one chapter per week. We'll read through it. So that way if you guys don't have the book, you could just listen to it. I mean, I'm doing my best as far as, trying to bring the emotional life of the book and stuff like that. But I do know that there are certain chapters and stuff like that where there's a lot of communicating going on between numerous characters. So character 1, 2, and 3 are all talking to each other at the same time. So it is a little difficult to kind of switch between characters. But, maybe I could figure something out. Maybe my roommate or something like that will want to jump in and play one of the characters. We can get like a little more emotion going for you guys or something. Make it a little fun. So we're not quite there yet. But if we do decide to do that, then I will definitely let you guys know. So I had a great time tonight reading this book with you guys. This is absolutely my favorite book. I mean, there's only two to choose between, but this one actually is my favorite and the one I'm the most proud of. I put a lot of work into this book, and the story was just so good. Like, I mean, at least I think so. And the feedback I've gotten, it's very humbling. But you'll see as we really dive into it, it gets real dark, and it's way more descriptive than the first book, and you get to bond with the characters a lot more. I mean, there's people that have read this and stuff like that, like I'm sure Stormy could attest, like, Gwen. So thank you guys so much for those who have tuned in and listened to it. If you are looking to get the book, if I piqued your interest, you can certainly jump onto Amazon and grab the book for 99 cents for the Kindle version, a little bit more money for the actual hardcover or softcover. But check it out. I promise you won't be disappointed. And thank you guys so much for sticking around and listening to this. And I will see you again on Tuesday.